Street Fighter the movie, Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 versions. I've been on a quest to explore all the weird versions of Street Fighter games, and I think I may have hit the jackpot here. Street Fighter the movie, the game. This is the Street Fighter game that is based on the live-action film that starred Jean-Claude Van Damme and Kylie Minogue. This is the game based on the movie, based on the game. But whilst that is unusual enough, it's only just scratching the surface of the story here. You see, in today's discussion, I'll be specifically looking at the home console version of Street Fighter the movie that released on the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn. You see, there was an arcade game with the same name, but this game is nearly completely different. So before we get into what makes this game good and what makes this game bad and what makes this game downright weird, let's just clarify all the moving parts. Capcom made Street Fighter 2, which was a huge hit and led to the creation of a live-action movie in America and starring the muscles from Brussels, Jean-Claude Van Damme. At the same time, there was an anime Street Fighter 2 film that was produced in Japan. Both of these projects would lead to new video games to adapt the movies, which were themselves adaptations of the game. The game based on the animated movie was called Street Fighter 2 Movie, whilst the arcade game based on the American-produced live-action movie was called Street Fighter the Movie. With the live-action cast as versions of the iconic characters, Capcom decided to capitalize on their casting by producing a game that featured digitized graphics, as had previously been done to great success in the Mortal Kombat fighting game series. Now, on paper, this sounds a great idea. Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat were in something of a war for gamers' attention, and one thing Mortal Kombat had over Street Fighter was its impressive and realistic digitized graphics. This is where they filmed actual actors and martial artists in front of a blue screen and turned that footage into the frames of animation. As much as people loved Street Fighter 2, it did look less advanced by being traditionally designed characters. So, what better way to dish Mortal Kombat a fatality than by taking the gameplay of Street Fighter 2 but dishing it up with digitized graphics of not just real actors but famous movie stars who would be in a summer blockbuster that fans will have rushed to the cinema to see? Well, unfortunately, this is where things started to fall apart. You see, the team at Capcom didn't have the experience of creating digitized graphics, and so they handed the creation of the game to a US-based company, which, as best as I can find out, was called Incredible Technologies, who were equipped to make this happen, having previously worked on a Mortal Kombat clone. So, unfortunately, things started to fall apart as soon as they started working on it. To begin with, Raul Julia, who played M. Bison, was unfortunately gravely ill at the time of making the film, and so didn't take part in making of the game. Instead, his stunt double stepped into the role. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude Van Damme was a big movie star, and apparently he only spent a few hours filming all of his stuff, and maybe his stunt double then ended up filming the rest. The story gets stranger though, as whilst Incredible Technologies were making the arcade game, Capcom themselves would be handling the home version for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. This led to two games that are very, very different. Unfortunately, this is an example of Capcom not learning from past mistakes. In a previous episode of weird Street Fighter games that I've made on this channel, I looked at the game Human Killing Machine, which was something of a spiritual successor to Street Fighter 1. This came about because Capcom made the mistake of letting the company Tiertex make bad versions of the original Street Fighter game. And here Capcom were again letting another company that were ill-equipped and unexperienced make another Street Fighter game for them, and it had another disappointing result. Add to this that although I love Street Fighter the movie, and I don't say that ironically, it gives me such nostalgia watching that film today, the general consensus was that it wasn't a good film, and Capcom had a game with more going against it than going for it. But today, in this video, I won't specifically be looking at the arcade version of Street Fighter the movie. I will be looking at that in a later video, as like I said, it's an entirely separate game. No, today I will be looking at the Capcom handled Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 version, and I'll be honest, I actually think it's a little bit worse than the arcade game. Now, in the game, you either have a story mode, which is called movie mode, or you have street mode, which is basically arcade mode from any other Street Fighter game. Clearly, they didn't call it arcade mode because it was a different game than the arcade game. Now, if you play movie mode, you are treated to several story scenes that play out with tiny clips of video and still images. And look, when I say tiny clips of video, I use that term kinda loosely. If you want to read some text whilst watching Kylie Minogue open and shut her mouth on loop, then yeah, that might give you the sense that she's talking. Boom, there you go, that's a cutscene, but realistically it's pretty much just still images. Outside of these scenes and some very light decision-making choices that you have along the way that give you branching options of who to fight next, the game plays out just like any other Street Fighter game, where all you do is fight after fight after fight. One thing that's interesting here is that later Street Fighter games would also adopt a branching choice of who you fight next. Whilst this may have been a series first, something that wasn't a series first was that the main mode sees you take it on as just one character. Yes, in movie mode you can only play as Guile, which is the first time since Street Fighter 1 where you would only challenge the whole game as Ryu, that the main mode focused on just one character. And here's the thing, I don't often choose to play as Guile in Street Fighter games. I like the character, I love his theme tune, but I've always preferred playing as Ryu and Ken. Oh, and I'll sidetrack myself for a moment here, as the pronunciation of Ryu as Ryu or Ryu is something that the two different versions of Street Fighter the movie differ on. I'll again note that since the movie specifically pronounces it as Ryu, and the arcade game therefore also says Ryu, I'll say Ryu on occasion as well. But I get it, you're all going to tell me in the comments that it's Ryu, and since this is the Japanese produced game, then sure, in this one it might be Ryu. But anyway, getting back to Guile, playing this game certainly means you'll have to get used to playing as him. That is, if you can tolerate playing this game. After playing both the arcade and then the PlayStation and Saturn games, I think Capcom actually did make the worst version of the game here. The game is so slow and bland feeling that they shouldn't have named it Street Fighter 2 the movie, they should have called it Street Fighter 2 Slow-Mo. Outside of movie mode, the arcade mode lets you play as a more traditional lineup of Street Fighter characters. There's no Dhalsim in either this or the arcade version, but whilst the arcade game has characters that are exclusive to that version, so does the home console one. Namely, the exclusive characters in the console version are Blanka and DJ. When I played the arcade game, I figured that perhaps they had a limited roster because it was just trying to be different, or perhaps they couldn't get all of the actors to take part. But no, they clearly did take part, and Blanka was barely in the movie after all, but Blanka is in this version, along with DJ. Although my thoughts when seeing both Blanka and DJ in this is that maybe they were excluded, as neither version in this movie look anything like how they do in the games. It's like they got Arsenio Hall from Coming to America to play DJ and a classic WWF jobber painted green to play Blanca. But hey, at least they are in this version. It's really noticeable that M. Bison is not played by Raul Julia in this game. The actor, who I mainly knew as Gomez Adams, played Bison when he was incredibly ill, so his stunt double takes over the role, and this is where the downside of digitized graphics comes in. If this game had graphics like on any other Street Fighter game, then you wouldn't have ever known that they had a casting issue, but when you use actual footage of people, if those people don't show up, then you have a problem. And I always find it funny how Bison's hat is so low in this game, just so it hides his face and you can't see that they've got a different actor. But these kind of issues didn't stop here. Apparently Jean-Claude Van Damme only gave limited time, and if we look at his animation we can maybe spot where it's not him and is a stunt double. The guy who played T-Hawk just didn't show up to be filmed, so his character, despite being in the movie and one of the promoted new challenges in Super Street Fighter 2, is nowhere to be seen. They're lucky that they got any of the stars of the movie to be in this, and legend has it that they had only signed up to be in the movie and then held up production of the game because they wanted to renegotiate appearing in the game. Now, maybe if you think of a game like Batman the movie or RoboCop, if they'd used a photo from the movie to show one of the actors in the game, it's quite likely that the studio would say, "We signed you up to be in all related merch." But for Street Fighter the movie, the game, if they wanted the likes of Time Cop Jean-Claude Van Damme, or to be so lucky to have Kylie Minogue, they literally needed the actors to show up and film their character sprites for the game. If they declined to do this, it wouldn't affect their being in the movie, so they could really hold up Capcom and the movie studio for more money just to appear in the game as well. I read in an interview about the making of the game that they had originally planned to film the cast twice doing each move, once for the production of the arcade game and then a second time for the production of the Saturn and PS1 games. This plan didn't last long as Capcom just decided to use the same graphics for both games. I mean, when you think about it, how cool would have it been to see a side-by-side comparison of every move being done and yet it not being the same footage? I mean, obviously they had made the more sensible choice just to use one lot of footage, but that doesn't mean there aren't still quite a few differences. I don't think the moves are all the same across both versions, and when we look at them side by side, especially in slow motion, we can reveal where differences lie. It amazes me to see that Capcom literally drew some frames of animation that they obviously felt were missing. For me, this is most apparent during one of Ken's kick moves, where clearly they hadn't got all of the frames to complete the animation of one of his newer moves from Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Also, when a character is caught on fire, like when they're being hit by a dragon punch, they literally use the same flaming body graphics from Street Fighter 2. This looks a little out of place as it doesn't match the body shapes of the real actors found in the game. The game does include the character Sawada, and he is notable as being an original creation for the movie, but with the interesting backstory himself that he was originally cast to play Ryu, but didn't speak good enough English, so he was still in the movie and the game, but as a new character that Capcom just kind of forgot about after Street Fighter the movie. The stages on this game are unremarkable, and they don't all seem to be specific to all of the characters, and sometimes just feel a bit random. There is a scene with some elephants in the background, but this is odd considering Dulcim isn't a playable character. The music could have been a little bit of a grittier take on the iconic tunes than what we got. I forget if the sound in the game comes from the movie at all, but it's just so boring to me. The voices in the game are also really weird. They don't sound like the actors at all. Can Van Damme's Sonic Boom sound any less like Sonic Boom? It sounds more like he's saying front pool. The game has footage from the movie, but not the sound to go with it. This is weird for a game that came out on a CD format. So when it all comes down to it, like, being a PS1 and Sega Saturn game, the sprites aren't as detailed as the arcade game. They look a little bit washed out and just nowhere near as good as the equivalent Mortal Kombat characters at the time. And with this being a Mortal Kombat stylized Street Fighter game, whereas Street Fighter 2 was the game that kind of led the fighting game revolution, it now seemed like Street Fighter was copying Mortal Kombat, and it kind of fell flat on its face. I genuinely don't think this is a better game than the arcade version, but let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, do smash that subscribe button here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel, and let me know what you think I should cover next on the next episode of Weird Street Fighter games. There's a ton of games in this series, so do check them out on the channel, and as always, go to www.xstreamed.tv/gaming for all of the written article versions of all of the videos I do on the channel. So with that, until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Sonic Boom, and we're off the air.